Hello and welcome back. My name is Nathan House and I am with the Houston Church of Christ in Houston, California. And if you could like or subscribe to this video, that would be great. Thank you so much. I want to begin with a little unusual beginning. I want to ask for prayers. Many of you know that our house and the church was damaged when unintentionally cement came up through toilets and things in our house. So it came through a sewage line and cement filled several rooms in our house, 6 to 10 inches deep with concrete, damaged the church building as well. And so currently our house is, this was on December 6th. So our house is still very much unlivable and the church is going through a lot of construction and repairs as well. So this is our auditorium right here. I just thought I'd show you real quickly. And you can see our pews are gone, carpet's gone, our baptistry has been cut out. Here's where they're trenching to put new sewage lines in, going back to our nursery. And so there's a live video of them. So they're trenching this. All this is done to replace and to repair the damage that occurred. So we just ask you to be in prayer for us, mindful of us in your prayers as we try to navigate and keep our worship and our Bible class hours functioning. So please keep that in your prayers. We're going to be back in the book of Ruth. We're going to be in chapter 2 and chapter 3 of the book of Ruth. We introduced Ruth last time, so you can go back and watch that last video. Today we're going to begin by looking at a few verses from Ruth chapter 2. And this is not going to be a verse-by-verse study, as I made mention of that last time, but I do want to begin here. And let's kind of look at this chapter 2, and let's look at what is revealed about the person Ruth in this text. So let's begin real quickly. Look at Ruth chapter 2, verse 7. So she said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers." So she came, and look at this. She has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. So here is Ruth, this young Moabite woman, and she is asked if she could glean, and she worked from morning until now with very little rest. We come down to verse 17. So she gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. So what do we learn real quickly about Ruth from verse 7 and 17? We see she was a hardworking person. There is a value in being a person that works hard. I think our society has devalued this, or at least it's been somewhat neglected, but there is a value in being the kind of person that works hard, that spends your energy and work and an effort, and she was that kind of person. What else do we see about her? Look at verse 10. It says, "Then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, 'Why?'" So Ruth is talking to Boaz. "Why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner?" Look at verse 13. "Then she said, 'I have found favor in your eyes, my lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants.'" What else do we see about Ruth? She was very appreciative of the kindness given to her. She was a thankful person, an appreciative person. And again, this is also a very valuable characteristic, isn't it? A very valuable character when we are people that are appreciative of those who show kindness to us, and we're thankful for that. I want to bring us back to another verse here. And this is not necessarily reflecting on Ruth, but I want to take us back to another verse here where it says in verse 3, so Ruth goes out and it says in verse 3, so she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. Now watch this. "And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz." This is kind of an interesting phrase. She happened to come. Killen Delitzsch translated this as her chanced to hit upon the field. Her chanced to hit upon the field. She just happened to come to the field of a man named Boaz, which we will see is very significant. She just happened to come upon his field. Another individual, McGee, said, "This was not chance, but the leading of the unseen hand of God." So this text says she happened to hit upon this field. Was this chance, or was there something more to this? What else do we see in this chapter 2? I want to quickly look at a few things concerning the man Boaz. Look at verse 4. "And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, 'The Lord be with you.' And they answered, 'The Lord bless you.'" So first of all, notice this. He was kind to his workers. He greets them not just with any greeting, but a greeting from the Yahweh creator, the one they have a covenant relationship. "Yahweh be with you." To which they respond, "Yahweh bless you." And so perhaps this is a reflection upon the kind of man he was, that there seemed to be a positive relationship with him and those who worked for him. Also note this and remember this. This was all occurring in the very dark days of the book of the time of the Judges, right? Go back to Ruth chapter 1, verse 1. This was occurring in the time of Judges. Go read the book of Judges. Go watch the videos we've done. The Judges was a dark time in the history of Israel. And yet here is a man who has on his mind Yahweh, the God of Israel. So again, we take note of the fact that he's kind to his workers, that he is a man who has on his mind Yahweh. What else do we see about Boaz from this chapter? Verse 11, it says, but Boaz answered her, so he's talking to Ruth, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and your mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. So notice this. He was a man impressed by the commitment of this Ruth, this young lady. He was impressed by her commitment. He was impressed by what she has done for this family, even though she was a foreigner. And so again, it's interesting to note that. Then in verse 12, it says, Boaz speaking to Ruth says, the Lord, and again, we take notice of the fact that Boaz again refers to Yahweh and sees Yahweh. He sees Yahweh in these situations and circumstances and in the works of Ruth. And again, this was unique in this dark time, I believe. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord. Watch what he says, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. And how bit of irony here, isn't there? For those of you who know the rest of the story, a bit of irony, because Boaz recognizes that she has come to take refuge under the hand of the Lord, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Interesting, isn't it? I'm going to jump ahead here in the story, that ultimately God will use this man Boaz to be the one to cover Ruth, to be the one who she will take refuge in him. And yet ultimately Boaz sees this as something coming from the Lord himself. So what else do we see? He's kind and generous. Look at verse 16. It says Boaz is talking to his reapers. He tells them, pull out some from the bundles for her and leave it for her to glean, and don't rebuke her. Give her extra. Make sure she's taken care of. And again, this is kind of something we need to kind of remember. The book of Deuteronomy, chapter 24, the instructions God gives to Israel when they harvest, it says, when you reap your harvest in your field and you forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be for the sojourner. Ruth was a sojourner. It shall be for the fatherless. It shall be for the widow. Ruth was a widow. He says, leave this here. Why? That the Lord God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat olive trees, don't go over them again. Verse 21, when you gather the grapes of your vineyard, don't go back and pick up every last little bit. Verse 22, why should you not do this? Because God sees this as a way to remember those who are unfortunate. You shall remember, in doing this, you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. So we see again, he is kind and he is generous. He is giving to her. He is providing for her by leaving and even giving extra. But again, it's interesting to note God's words here in the book of Deuteronomy as well. And so we're going to see that ultimately Boaz becomes her redeemer. And we'll talk about this for a moment. But again, you'll notice this phrase down here. He becomes her redeemer. And what is the purpose of this? What is the meaning of this redeemer? Well, again, this comes from the Old Testament book of Deuteronomy. In fact, you can see it some other places as well, but we're going to look primarily here real quickly at Deuteronomy 25. If brothers dwell together and one of them dies and has no son. So here we have a widow and she's married to a man. It says the wife of the dead man. So the wife shall not be married outside the family. The wife of the dead man is supposed to marry someone in the family. Her husband's brother shall go to her. So there becomes someone who is supposed to come and marry the wife of the dead man. The brother shall, if there's no brother, the job was to pass, this responsibility was to pass to somebody else. And look, verse 7, and if the man does not wish to take his brother's wife, then his brother's wife shall go up to the gate of the elders and say, my husband's brother refuses to perpetuate his brother's name. He will not perform the duty Verse 8, then the elders of the city shall call him and speak to him, and if he persists, saying, I don't want to take her, then his brother's wife shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, pull his sandal off his foot, and spit in his face, and she shall answer and say, so shall it be done to the man who does not build upon his brother's house. So there was a responsibility given to take care of a widow. And it says in verse 10, the name of his house shall be called in Israel the house of him who has his sandal pulled off. So there was a responsibility to take care of a family member. If there was a brother, if there was no brother, the responsibility to redeem that widow would go to the next closest kin. And so we're going to see here that this becomes relevant in the story of Ruth. Let's go to Ruth chapter 3. And I want to take some more observations for the woman Ruth and for the man Boaz as well. But let's really quickly look at a few verses regarding this character, this woman Ruth. Verse 5 says, and she replied, so she's talking to her mother-in-law Naomi, all that you say I will do. Verse 6, so she went down to the threshing floor just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. So we take note of this from those two verses. Ruth was willing to listen, willing to consider, and to follow advice of someone who was hopefully a good counselor, a good wise counselor. But she was willing to listen. How important is it that we listen to those who are older than us, who are elders, who are wise? We also see something else about Ruth in verse 11. And now, my daughter, do not fear. So this is Boaz talking. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know, watch what Boaz says about her. You are a worthy woman. She was a woman of good reputation. And again, this is an important thing to note about Ruth. She was a hard worker. She listened to others. She cared about others. She was a person who had a good reputation. It is important what others say about us. It's not so important that we should be someone we're not or try to be someone worldly or immoral, but it is important that we as Christians have a reputation of someone who is worthy. And so Ruth had this reputation. What else do we see from this chapter? I want to point out something concerning the man Boaz. Verse 7, notice again this. When Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, he went down to lie at the heap of the grain. So what do we see about Boaz? We see something that is kind of subtle here perhaps, but I think this reflects upon the fact that Boaz was a hard worker as well. Just as Ruth had been a hard worker in chapter 2, here's Boaz. He's laying at the bottom of the grain. This was common for them to do. One gentleman commenting on this made mention of this, that until the wheat is transferred to bags, someone sleeps by the pile on the threshing floor. That came from ISB, International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, right? So this was a common practice, but he slept there because he was a man who followed the customs of the day. He was a hard worker. What else do we see about Boaz? Verse 12 and 13, he's now speaking again to Ruth. And again, notice this word redeemer, right, that I mentioned a moment ago. And now it is true, watch what he says, that I am a redeemer. Yet there is a redeemer nearer than I, nearer in kins, nearer to the family than he was. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, meaning this other individual, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. So what do we learn about him from this? That he was concerned about what is right. He was concerned about redeeming Ruth. Why? Because that's right. He was also concerned with the fact that this was supposed to go to the closest of kin. And so he was trying to make sure that these things were all being done properly and correctly. So he was concerned about what is right. What do we learn from this as we look back at chapter 2 and 3 and try to make an application? What do we learn from this? First of all, it's very significant to note the man Boaz. He went out to work, and by the way, this is what's called the field of Boaz near Jerusalem, near Bethlehem. Here, and is this the actual field of Boaz? I don't know. I don't know how sure they are about this, but it is called the field of Boaz in several different books that I was looking at. But here's my point here. The book of Ruth is written during a dark time. The book of Judges was a dark time, but here is a man and a woman, at this time, especially Boaz, right? We see a man of faith, a man who is trying to live honorably, a man who's trying to do what is right. So this book of Ruth really is a strong contrast to that book of Judges. It's occurring in the same time. And there were so many people in the book of Judges who, again, the book of Judges says they were doing what is right in their own eyes. Judges 17, verse 6, and some other verses as well. So, but here in the book of Ruth, we have people like Boaz, like Ruth, who are trying to do and to live righteously. So what do we learn? What do we see again? What is our application? Well, first of all, there's this, that the hand of God was active in the life of Boaz and Ruth, even though it was subtle. Again, verse 3, she happened to come upon the field. She just happened to come upon the field of the man who was a godly man, a man who was going to redeem her. Then we come to chapter 3 and verse 10, and we again notice Boaz's words and his concern again is highlighted by the fact that the Lord was relevant in his life. He says, may Yahweh bless you. Then coming down here, he says, but if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord, as Yahweh lives, I will redeem you. So he recognizes Yahweh as the living God. He recognizes Yahweh as the one who blesses. Boaz may not be sure where all of this is going. He may not be sure how it's all going to end. But what he does understand is this: the Lord is the one who blesses, and he is the living God. And if we understand this in our own life, that it is the Lord who blesses, that he is the living God, how should that impact us? How should that impact our direction of our life, the plans we make, the choices we make? And so the book of Ruth subtly brings to light the hand of God in the tragic life of Naomi, in the tragic life of Ruth. God's hand works subtly in this book to care for these widowed women. And in chapter 3, we didn't look over it, but beginning in verse 1, Naomi has this plan. She has a plan. Ruth follows the plan. But ultimately, this book reflects upon the Lord's hand to bring about his will, as we'll see next time. But here's the point. We plan our lives. We work to advance our plan. But the key for us in all of this, is this point here. Keep God in your plan. Seek him in what you're trying to do. Seek him in prayer. Seek first his will. Seek first his kingdom. And as Jesus says in Matthew 6, seek first his kingdom. All those other things that we think are so important, God will take care of those. Let's seek to make sure we keep God in our plans. Thank you for your attention. God bless.